All right, question number 17 of the Summa Theologia, which logically flows from the last question, which was on truth. And so St. Thomas Aquinas wants to talk about falsity, concerning falsity. And it's interesting, you'll notice as we go through these four articles, I think there are, about falsity, is that he's not going to just say it's just a privation of the truth. It seems to me, and you can tell me if you disagree with this, that St. Thomas Aquinas is saying that falsity kind of has its own thing. There is the truth, but there's also falsity. Whereas, like when he talks about sin, he's going to say later on in the Summa that sin really lacks being itself. It's just the absence of the good. And so I think there's a little bit of a distinction here, and you let me know what you think as we go along. And so here is the first article: whether falsity exists in things. Okay, is there falsity in things themselves? And he's going to make a distinction here between, God and man. And so, as you might expect, that seems to be a constant theme of the Summa. So he says in the corpus here, since true and false are opposed, and since opposites stand in relation to the same thing, we must needs seek falsity where primarily we find truth, that is to say, in the intellect, right? Now, in things, neither truth nor falsity exists except in relation to the intellect. All right, a thing indeed may be called false simply when compared with the intellect on which it depends and which it is compared. Now, this is an interesting distinction he makes. Now, natural things depend on the divine intellect and artificial things on the human. A natural thing would be the sun, or grass, or a tree, or a toad, or a raccoon, or a human being, right? Because these are created by God. An artificial thing would be a house, or a bridge, or a piece of art, right? These are artificial. Well, that's where we get the word art. They are not directly created by God, but they're created through the mind of a human being. Wherefore, artificial things are said to be false simply and in themselves, insofar as they fall short of the form of the art. Whence a craftsman is said to produce a false work if it falls short of the proper operation of his art. Isn't that interesting? So if a craftsman builds a bridge that doesn't serve the purpose of a bridge, then it's false. Or he creates something that doesn't, and I don't know how that would go with art, like a painting or something, because there are certainly some paintings that you look at and you're like, that is really wrong, right? But it's an interesting conversation, though. Okay, now, in things that depend on God, falseness cannot be found. Okay, so there can't be a false turtle or a false toad or a false sunrise, right? Because this is natural. This is created by God, insofar as they are compared with the divine intellect, since whatever takes place in things proceeds from the ordinance of that intellect, unless perhaps in the case of voluntary agents. All right, so even natural things cannot be false in the mind of God, but we can mess them up. Okay, we can misidentify them, as he's going to say. But in relation to our intellect, natural things which are compared thereto accidentally can be called false, not simply, but relatively, and in two ways. In one way, according to the thing signified, and thus a thing is said to be false as being signified or represented by a word or thought that is false. And so if I look at a frog and say, look, there's a snake, okay, that says nothing about God or the truth of the object. It's just that I'm wrong, right? And so I think that's what he's getting at here. In another way, a thing can be called false by way of cause. This is interesting. And thus a thing is said to be false that naturally begets a false opinion. And whereas it is innate in us to judge things by external appearances, since our knowledge takes its rise from the senses, which principally and naturally deal with external accidents, therefore those external accidents which resemble things other than themselves are said to be false with respect to those things. And then he gives a couple of examples. Gall is false honey, tin false gold. All right, so tin, so these are things that are appear to be as something else, and they fool us. I think that's what he's saying here. And so they're false in that sense. And I don't know. That's how I take that to mean. Whether there is falsity in the senses. All right. We know this is true because we look at the sun and it looks like it's this big, but it's really huge. Or we see that old trick about the pencil in the water and it looks like it's bent, but it's really not. Or you see these, these mirages in the road as you're driving, but it's not really there. Or a person far away looks like they're this big. So we know that our senses fool us. And by the way, that's what Descartes, how he came to his conclusion of I think therefore I am. One of the things that he said was we can't trust the senses. All right, when he applied the scientific method to philosophy and he wanted absolute certainty, and one thing he threw out were the senses. That caused a lot of problems because it separated the mind and the body. But anyways, okay, falsity is not to be sought in the senses except as truth is in them. Now, truth is not in them in such a way as that the senses know truth. Remember, the senses only know particulars and not essences. But in so far as they apprehend sensible things truly. And this takes place through the senses apprehending things as they are, and hence it happens that falsity exists in the senses through their apprehending or judging things to be otherwise than they really are, all right, as I have just explained. All right, so let's move on. Whether falsity is in the intellect. He says, just as a thing has being by its proper form, so the knowing faculty has knowledge by the likeness of the thing known. Okay, did you get that? Hence, as natural things cannot fall short of the being that belongs to them by their form, remember, natural things in the mind of God, they cannot be false, but may fall short of accidental or consequent qualities, even as a man may fail to possess 2 feet, but not fail to be a man. So, saying things in the natural world are true in and of themselves, but we, because of our weakness of our intellect and our mind and our senses, we may mess it up. So the faculty of knowing cannot fail in the knowledge of the thing with the likeness of which it is informed, but may fail with regard to something consequent upon that form or accidental thereto. All right. In one way, by the intellect applying to one thing the definition proper to another, as that of a circle to a man. Okay, have you ever looked at a man and said, hey, look, there's a circle? But he's just using an example. I do think, by the way, St. Thomas Aquinas did have a somewhat of a sense of humor. I think that might have been his attempt to be funny, a circle and a man. I mean, what do those two have in common with each other? I wanted to do a video one time about the times in the Summa that Thomas is humorous. There's not many, but that may be a video forthcoming. Okay, wherefore the definition of one thing is false of another. And another way, by composing a definition of parts which are mutually exclusive. For thus the definition is not only false of the thing, but false in itself. A definition such as a reasonable 4-footed animal. Okay, no creatures with 4 feet have reason, okay, would be this kind in the intellect, false in making it. All right, so that's his example. Or you can't have a 4-footed creature that has reason. Okay, so by its very definition, that would be false. All right, so finally, the last article is whether true and false are contraries. You can probably figure this one out. True and false are opposed as contraries and not, as some have said, as affirmation and negation. As I said at the beginning of this video, Thomas makes a little bit of a distinction. He seems to be implying that falsity kind of has its own thing, and it's not just a negation. Tell me if you agree. Privation asserts nothing, whereas it determines its subject, for it is negation in a subject. For blindness is not said except of one whose nature it is to see. Okay, Thomas would call blindness a corruption of nature. It's not natural, right, to be blind. Okay, falsity asserts something, for a thing is false, as the philosopher says, inasmuch as something is said or seems to be something that it is not, or not to be what it really is. For as truth implies an adequate apprehension of a thing, so falsity implies the contrary. Okay, that's pretty obvious, but hence it is clear that true and false are contraries. Okay, we already knew that, but it's good to hear it from St. Thomas Aquinas, isn't it? All right, those last two questions were challenging for me anyways, truth and falsity. The next question tomorrow is going to be on the life of God. All right, we're already in 17. We've got only up to 26 with the treatise on God, and so he's going to get into the Trinity and the power of God and some other really interesting things. So it's really fascinating, the things that Thomas asks about in this treatise on God. I hope you're enjoying it. Let me know what you think, and any comments or questions. Let's get the conversation going, and I hope you're enjoying this as much as I am, and thank you for watching. St. Thomas Aquinas, pray for us. God bless you.